Got a nice little tail there.
Hmm. You must not hear us yet. Christy? Yeah, you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, yeah. Let me get back to mine.
There she is.
There she is. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and thank you again for being so flexible with us, with our schedules and us having to change the actual date this time. So I really do appreciate it. For you all as well. Just a couple of updates. Jordan sent out the minutes today. So when you have a chance from the last meeting, take a peek at the minutes. If you notice any errors, any factual errors, please do reach out to her and let her know. And then we will move these to the Google folder as well for you. Also within the Google folder, the workload folder that I created for everyone, be sure that after this meeting as well that you go in and update the actual sign-in sheet for each meeting there. You can initial or put a check or something of that nature. And I think I may have gone in previously and kind of put a check. So if you were present, so if you want to just add your initials there, that would be great, just so we can have, the running record of who was all in attendance from each meeting. Today, we are going to have Dr. K and D. Archie to do a presentation on their two charges, which was E, is to provide, if appropriate, recommendations for revision to the Mississippi Charter School contract, and also F, to provide, if appropriate, for consideration during the 2021 legislative session, specific recommendations for amendments to the Mississippi Code 372823. So we're looking forward to it. Are you two ready?
Mm-hmm. Ready.
Yep.
Ready. Okay.
Okay, D. Archie, you're on.
Okay.
He's PowerPoint extraordinaire.
I will pull it up and share my screen. Here we go. Oops. Okay, so I'll start, and Lisa and I will tag team this. We worked on this together, but based off of everyone's input from the last sessions, A through D. So first one is to start with the why, because this is the last meeting, and so why the Student Enrollment Task Force was created and why we're doing this work. And Lisa, you jump in as well. So a concern was raised and a need was seen. And so people who this impacts most were invited to participate in the task force to deal with the issues and drive a change or a solution regarding this. And
yeah, thank you. So I guess most of you know, well, especially the two schools that are represented with the exception of Clarksdale, had some student enrollment issues around not meeting those numbers that were required. And so in response to that, and recognizing that there was an opportunity to do something different, we put together the task force, and then asked Avery to be a part of it as well, and Mr. Billingsley, of course. That was a recommendation from Quentin, I think, when we first started the task force. So I'm sorry, y'all. I just won't answer. I don't know how to mute this thing. Jordan, how do I mute my own phone? There we go. It won't mute if I'm sorry, y'all. I hate that. It's gonna drive me crazy till it quits ringing. Anyway, so we put together the task force, and I feel like we've actually made a lot of progress working toward the issues at hand and finding ways that we can collectively use our experiences and what we know about the law and actually find ways to address it in a fair and equitable way for all of the schools going forward. So I feel good about what we did.
And I'll say, you said this may have been the first time that a task force has been created with charter school
To my
leaders.
knowledge, Christy can speak to that, or Amanda. Christy's been here the longest, but to my knowledge, this is the first time that the authorizer has ever had a task force address challenges, in the community. Christy? You're muted.
Still can.
Okay. Yes. No, we've never had a task force, and I mean, I'll be honest with you, we were never asked, for input. So, to even have this opportunity to start a conversation about, questions that have come up while we've been open, areas that could use a little tweaking. I mean, I certainly appreciate having the opportunity to start the conversation. So. And I hope this is one of many as we continue, to work through, what was started 5 years ago. It's Kevin and I were just having a conversation earlier about, some of the requirements and questions that have come up, and things that we're being asked to do that we have not been asked to do over the last 5 years. And I don't know if it's just people. MDE didn't realize that we needed to do it, or why all of a sudden some of these things are coming up. But I'm certainly glad to be a part of this group, and and how we move forward.
Well, and we appreciate your input, because you being, I don't want to say the oldest, but you being the one that has the most experience in the charter community here on this task force, understanding that Reimagine opened the same year as you guys did, but it's in particular having your historical reference is important, I think, guiding the work as we go forward. And then in particular with Clarksdale, your grade levels started out the same way DRG's did. So having your experience in terms of enrollment and challenges that you may have had in terms of meeting those numbers that are required, your information and your experience and your input was invaluable to us too. So we did think about deliberately how to set up the task force, and we're really intentional about what we did and who to include for those very reasons, Christy. So, see, Archie, anything you want to add to that?
Just that I learned a lot through this process also, so happy to be a part of it. And then so with task E and F, we were looking at, if appropriate, recommendations for revisions or amendments to the contract or statute. And we also brought up the framework as well too. And then we'll go over the statute. And here, Lisa, I'll let you speak to this. You may.
Okay. So one of the things we talked about was, do we even need to look at the statute and make any changes there? Because like I said yesterday, I'm gonna try to find y'all again. I said when DRG and I were talking about this again, I said, anytime you open up the statute, and y'all have heard me say this, it opens everything up. So how much do you want to expose yourself? What can we work through the framework? What areas can we work through the operations, the policies, practices, procedures, as opposed to getting into the statute itself and making changes? Where is there some leverage that we can take advantage of, maybe through the framework or other ways and means? Having said that, we acknowledge that there are opportunities in the statute to change that statute by deleting as opposed to adding language. So the words on the statute here said collective, let me pull up my document and I can tell you exactly what it said. Hang on just a second here. The words and I have a little red line version I'm happy to send y'all, but it said the underserved student composition of a charter school's enrollment collectively must reflect that of students of all ages. So if we delete the words collectively and students of all ages and just leave in the language around grade level, then it would be, I think, helpful for us going forward. So DeArchie and I looked at that. We talked about the pros and cons of opening up the statute, what that may or may not look like. And it'll be, you know, based on everybody's input where we decide to go with this. So, anything you want to add to that, DeArchie, or I left out?
I think that's it. This is the one that we, or this issue is the one that we said will need a change or modification to the wording and the statute. So that's why we're talking about this one now. But there are other things that we have considered, considerations for. And so when it comes to the contract follows the law. And so we don't believe that the contract needs to be addressed unless or until the legislator takes action on technical amendments. Then a contract in our exhibit would all have to be revised to track the statute. So if the statute isn't changed, then we can't change the contract, or the contract can't be changed because it says 80% of all enrollment. We have to keep that in there. But where we do have more flexibility and the ability to make changes quicker too, or I don't know, quicker, but less, yeah, quicker is with the framework. And so that's what we're getting into next.
I think we thought it was a little premature to go in and make changes to a document and a contract at this point in time when we didn't know what the legislature would do, if they would take action, or even if the task force at the end of the day, so to speak, would recommend that they take action based on the other things that we're going to share. So that was our rationale for thinking around that.
Yeah, thank you. And so with the framework, having clear metrics in the framework and the framework guidance as well would be helpful, such as counting children and free and reduced lunch numbers, and only holding schools accountable when they can be fairly compared with the district in which they are located, with some of the concerns that we have that have been raised from the beginning of this task force. And,
I was just going to give a little update on the information too, that today and yesterday I spoke with the Department of Ed, and they were working to try and get that data available for us by grade level, but it looks like we're going to have to get that information through an updated MOU for data sharing that we have with the state board right now, and we'll have to update that to be able to get that level of granular data, because right now all we can get is by overall numbers, age group 6 through 21, I think it is. I think it was 6 through 20 on that document. And then it by the area of need. So if they were SLD or EMR or hearing impaired or speech language, whatever their, what am I trying to say? Their ruling, their ruling is, then that's all the information we would have had on that particular document from the SPED department. But OTSS is can get that granular level of information for us. So we'll work on that from our perspective. Okay.
And then recommendations for consideration for the framework. So addressing the concerns around comparing charter schools to districts that have been documented by MDE. So we were just talking about for, well, also over identification of special education students and in the framework guidance. So we have to flesh out more details here to see what is available from MDE. But I was able to get from MDE JPSs, just knowing that they were cited for over identification of special education students and that they did lose funding for that as well. But we want to make sure that it is available for all school districts and have a clear understanding on how and where to get this information, so that we can address the framework accordingly, so that we aren't, I wouldn't say, held, or I would say with the framework, so that we don't lose points, or so that it's clear like where we're going and what guidance. So it's clear that what we are doing can be reflected in the actual report that we receive as well. Hopefully that was clear enough. And then consider looking at enrollment numbers more than once a year and averaging those. This helps to counter a lower number at the beginning of the school year, and potentially lower numbers toward the end of the school year if families have moved. So Christy and I talked about this. So with special education students, let's say if a school has 100 students and you have 8 special education students, you're at the 8% is what we need for JPS here, 7.6. But if we lose 2 students, then we don't meet that anymore, meet the framework goal there. So we lose points. So some language in the guidance or either in the framework where we don't lose points for that if we can show this documentation. Did I say that clear?
Yeah, and I think it's about kind of about 2 things. One, it's about looking at enrollment over time as opposed to one snapshot like you do when you look at annual student assessments, right? You're looking at data over time, not just one day in time of the enrollment that day. So it gives you maybe a more comprehensive look at what your enrollment looks like, and it would be fair that way. The other piece of it is clearly defining that in the framework, and then making sure that what we do hold you accountable for is a fair measure, a fair metric that we can use for schools to be held accountable to, whatever that standard is.
And so can I jump in here and ask a question that's somewhat related to this? DRH and I talked about this. Lisa, do you know on enrollment with MDE, it was my understanding that they take the month 1 numbers, and that is our official enrollment number for the year that our funding is based upon for that year. So when they get ready to reconcile. But DRT mentioned that he was told that it's actually pulled later in a later month. Do you know when MDE?
I think you're asking two. I think y'all are talking about 2 different things.
Yes, we are. We
You're
are
talking about the special ed,
yes,
reconciliation numbers, and your MAEP funding.
that's right.
Those are 2 different things. So yeah, your MAEP dollars are pulled and projected from that month 1 enrollment and your ADA and all of that, right? Then your special ed is reconciled. When we send those numbers in, we send them in 3 times a year. I think it is. Vanda, correct me if I'm wrong. Twice? Okay. So we send those in, and then they reconcile those numbers, and then they project your SPED units for MAEP. Not IDEA is done differently, and I don't know how the IDEA numbers are calculated, but they're calculated somehow based on your enrollment as well. I just don't know how they do that.
Yeah, and I knew that was 2 separate, but the MAEP is still reconciled at month 1.
So Christy, when it comes to local dollars, local dollars is always month 1 from my understanding. So the money that we get from the local school districts or wherever the students are coming from. But MAEP can come from what I was told, MAEP can come from month 1, month 2, or month 3. They would not tell us which month they will pull from. However, it can come from any of those months. So they can actually pull it from November, which would be month 3.
Are you talking about your MAEP SPED or your MAEP?
I'm talking about general MAEP
MAEP.
overall. because it's readjusted. Of course, it's coming from that number then, but when they do the readjustments,
For the year
uh,
prior, they do readjust, yes.
yeah,
But when you're projecting, they're using that month one number, I thought.
when they're projecting, they're using whatever we sent to you all the prior year, those 2 times.
Oh, no. Okay. I think we're getting two things.
Okay, I'm sorry. Wait, maybe
No,
we can just.
but I think we're getting two things conflated here. We're getting the MAP base student formula cost conflated with the SPED MAP, which is different because your teacher units are calculated separately outside of that from your enrollment, your special ed numbers, not from your overall enrollment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I brought it up, and let me just wait to the end.
No, it's okay.
Because I would like to get clarification on that, because it kind of came up in DRT and I's conversation, and it was something, he was told something different than we have thought all along. But let's continue on, because I don't want to get us confused.
No, let's circle back to it, because I want to make sure we have clarity on it. So, and we're all speaking the same language about the same things. So, yeah. Okay, DRT, sorry.
And then revise how the enrollment numbers, and the slide is censored. So revise how the enrollment numbers impact the reports, the contract reference, documentation of effort and numbers are not met, if numbers are not met. So fleshing out the details here. So how does that impact the scoring or the rubric when it comes to enrollment numbers, and what documentation is provided?
Yeah, and really being clear about that, not just that efforts have been made, and that's what the law says and the contract says, efforts have been made. It's about ensuring that you're not being discriminatory in any way, you've not violated any civil rights and so forth, and you've got the appropriate documentation. So I think defining that documentation ahead of time and having clarity around that is really important.
And how do we know we're working towards so when the documentation is 3 points on the framework, how do we know we're working towards those 3 points? So just being, just clarity there. And then consider comparing grade levels to grade levels. We talked about this, apples to apples in early grades. For instance, kindergarten and first grade numbers for each respective district, and not compared to a K-12 district as a whole.
Right. Which makes really good sense to me. I mean, that feels like a better, more fair way to measure, as opposed to measure you against a district that's got 20,000 kids in it and you've got 150 kids in your school.
Exactly. And then these are the next steps. So October, we'll finalize task force recommendations, and then present to the Mississippi Charter School Authorizer Board. This is the Performance and Accountability Committee. And then December, share with all charter leaders for input or any concerns. And then there's a legislator task force with the authorizer board that will take it from there.
Yeah. We haven't finalized all that yet, but we are putting together, and I think I referenced it on during a board meeting recently, but we are putting together a legislative task force to look at specific legislation as well. I've gotten commitments from a few people, but not everybody yet, and we'll be rolling that out very shortly, middle of October to late October, when our first meeting is planned. And what we'll do is look at those specific, really school related, outside of two, which impact us really more than they do you, but two of the statutes. I think there were a total of anywhere from 13 to 15 statutes that we're going to look at. And then, because we don't have time, I mean, you can't go from 3728 1 all the way through 63 or 62, whatever it is now. You can't do that in 3 months and have recommendations. The other side of that coin is what I said earlier, and I'm anxious to get you guys' feedback on it. When you open that charter, if you open the code, you open yourself up to any amendment a friend or foe wants to put into the law. So I think we have to just be really cognizant of that and very sensitive to it. And DRT and I talked about this yesterday. Even though we're going to look at legislation and look at what the law says, my gut tells me the best way to operate is to be through policies, procedures, practices, and the framework, as opposed to opening ourselves up for the, contention that it could present. So anyway, we're going to go look at it and talk about it and see what everybody feels good about or where they feel like there's opportunities, and we'll take whatever recommendations come out of this task force to the legislative task force then. How's that sound, guys?
Sounds great.
I'd be really curious about the legislative task force, but I know that's not where we are right now, but that wasn't me necessarily raising my hand, but also just, I'm curious about which statutes out of, I'm curious.
The folks who have already committed to serve on that, and then the people that we'll be inviting to serve on that, they will have a survey, and they'll be able to rank order, and we'll go by consensus, the ones that they want to talk about and look at, and then we'll go from there. So they'll be able to share their input prior to, and that will inform the work of the task force.
Does it make sense to open it up to the charter community to give input before there's a lot of work done on statutes that have the biggest impact on schools?
I feel like, I don't know the answer to that, Amanda, right now, because it's almost a representative form of government kind of thing that we've got going on right now, where you've got representatives from the charter community. These are, of course, open meetings, and anybody can pop into them. And so I don't know the full answer to that. I feel like we're going to get a good sense from the people that will be on the committee, people who are experts and can really, can't be the same task force every time. So we'll have
There'll be school leaders. There'll be school leaders on the task force.
Absolutely. Representative, just like this one. So that's our goal, is to ensure that you guys are represented fully, because this impacts y'all much more than it does us. I said there were 2 particular statutes that we're going to be looking at. One is fingerprinting that impacts both of us. We didn't get that taken care of last year during the session. So we want to take that back to the House and the Senate and see what they can do for us this time, so that it takes some of the burden off of us, and you guys own those people, you employ those people, and then if something does happen, we're not responsible for them. So anyway, does that answer your question? Okay. All right. Other questions or
Did
thoughts?
you guys just focus on the SPED piece, or did you also focus on the other half of the underserved piece? So I think that was our problem in our first year. So all of the school districts in which we serve, the local districts are able to qualify for 100% free and reduced lunch through community eligibility.
Right.
And so in our first year, we could not get community eligibility. So there was no way for us to meet that standard. I shouldn't say there's no way.
I say
80%. So we basically had to have 80% free or reduced lunch.
Yeah, that's what we ran into, the same issue, but we were able to fix it in time, luckily. But we looked at all of the concerns that was brought up through the A, B, C, and D. When it came to the law, when it came to the statute and changing anything there with the free and reduced lunch, I think no one brought up a concern, an issue with the actual statute being 80%, thought it being fair, but I think with the framework we brought up, or maybe with the framework we brought up, maybe looking at the numbers more than once a year there too as well. And I think, Christy, I don't know if you brought this up, or I know I brought it up. I don't know if you brought it up too during ours with the free and reduced lunch, but I looked at the perspective that the Mississippi Charter School Authorizer Board looked at the numbers in November for us, but it can be at any time. I don't know. I guess that can change at any time. But had they looked at it in the beginning of August, we would have not been at that same as the district, or even close to the district, I'll say, because of kindergarten students.
And
So is that the concern overall, Amanda?
Not quite. I mean, if a school is under CEP, then 100% of they're reporting out 100% free or reduced lunch.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because they've hit a certain threshold.
That's right.
So, but our standard is still 80% because they're able to report out 100%.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Which is not.
It's not. You're right. Yeah, it's not exactly, and it's not exactly fair on the flip side of that either, because we've talked about this internally, because if you're using the 100% CEP, and most of our districts are, or our schools are in a district that would be 100% free lunch or free and reduced, then it's 100%, but what if your percent at your school is only 20%? And
Right, but we wouldn't get like, at least that's apples to apples. Like
right.
The district is CEP, we're CEP. So we are meeting the same standard.
Right now. Yeah.
If we're both CEP. But if for some reason we decide not to, which we would never decide
right.
not to be CEP, but I just think I think now more than ever, with going through financing and just looking at everything, like every report, everything matters, as far as, especially when we don't have any accountability ratings, like those reports matter. And so showing that we weren't meeting this certain standard, even though I would I don't think we know if we were meeting the standard, because we weren't, we couldn't apply for CEP in that time. And so
You're in your first year of operation, you mean?
For our first year of operation. So we were meeting the threshold in which the district had to meet in order to get CEP. But because we didn't have CEP, we couldn't claim 100%. And so it's not, in that sense, it's not an accurate reflection of whether or not we are meeting that standard.
Let me,
I see what you're saying.
yeah. Let me ask a question. When you, and maybe this is for DRG as well, when you are enrolling your kindergarten students, are you guys using that free and reduced lunch form?
You can't do both. So
Right,
with CEP,
right.
you can't use the form if you're going to do CEP.
So how do you apply for CEP as a charter school if you don't use a form to identify how many free and reduced lunch children you have? How do you do that?
Direct certification.
They're an MSIS.
I'm sorry, Amanda said something and you said something at the same time, basically.
Direct certification. So we can submit a list and know the kids who get SNAP benefits, for example. And so there's a way of figuring out the direct cert number.
And we did it through the SNAP thing through MSIS, and MDE actually did it for us. But the thing was, we didn't get access to MSIS as a first year until, I want to say, school had actually started. So it didn't. And like I said, it messed us up. Later on, we went back. That's why I was curious to see if you can go back later on in a year and update that number. We actually lost money because of that. We didn't get the 100% for MDE, child and nutrition, but we end up meeting the 100% later on. But their cutoff was month one, so August. Whatever we had then, we have to do for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation worth continuing to figure out how best, and maybe it is in the framework, how we decide going forward, how we're going to monitor that and hold schools accountable for that 80% of the local district, because it does present a challenge, and it did present a challenge for us when we were doing our visits and trying to collect data. So I do think it's worth going back to and revisiting and figuring out the best way to approach it.
But in that way too, Amanda, it's calculated based off of a formula. So can MDE not share, OTS not share that number of what actually, how many students actually qualified for them to get the 100%? Because that has to be somewhere over, I think 77% or, so maybe
Right.
there's an actual percentage of 83%. And then of course it's just gonna be 100. And you can take that.
But that's not how, if we weren't CEP, then I can't report 100%.
Right.
So,
But you can compare to their actual number versus their CEP number.
Oh, I see what you're saying, DRG.
And so their actual number is 83%. And if you're 80% of that, then like 67 or wherever that number falls in would be.
I mean, if we could get that number, that would be apples to apples to me.
Yeah.
That would,
Right.
I mean, I don't think I knew that number was available. And so if that number is available, then, I mean, I think that makes more sense than looking at everybody and assuming that everybody is 100%.
And I agree with you 100%. I think we, no pun intended, I think that caused an issue for us, you know, looking at it at 100%. So if it, let's say Clarksdale was at 89% free and reduced or whatever, then we had a valid number to reflect off of. So I agree. Vanda, you have anything you want to add to that? Because you are site visit and framework person.
Right. I've jotted that down, and I think I will reach out the Archie to see if that's possible, if we could get that actual number from the district, and that way we are doing a apples to apples comparison there. So I've noted that for sure. That would help us out a lot, because when we do come out to the site visits, then that's all we see is just the CEP information. We don't really know the actual percentages. So that would definitely help us out as well too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Christy,
If you qualify for,
DRG's frozen.
I think my only caveat, or like my only question would be if that creates, I would be interested in looking at that and continuing the conversation. I think the only thing that I'm worried about is if it creates an additional burden on schools. So for example, if 70% of our kids are on the direct cert list and we've hit that threshold, we're CEP, right? And so then we don't have to ask for income information from our families. And if we're trying to prove that we are, you know, I would be interested in having that conversation too, of just making sure that, like, does that number, is that an actual number, or is that just the direct cert, like enough to get you over the threshold? Just to not create an extra burden on schools that, in order to try to prove a certain number for the framework. Like if we say that CEP is if that's the federal standard, that's enough to say, like, we get federal dollars, a lot of federal dollars for food. Like, is that not a high enough standard for the authorizer? And so potentially what it could be is, if a school is not CEP or can't qualify for CEP, how do we make sure we're comparing the right number to the accurate district number?
yeah, and I think that's when it falls in, is when a school's not CEP and the district's not CEP, or if the district's not CEP in that way. But I think if both are CEP, then pretty much you will be within, because you have to be over that 70-something%. But both schools. But,
and this also might just be a question for like first year schools.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know, that was and it was like, I mean, food service was just a nightmare for us in our first year, and just like, and having that additional piece of trying to meet the standard that I know the district doesn't have was challenging.
yeah.
I will say this, I said this to DRG too. I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that the legislature is going to have any appetite for reducing accountability.
I don't want to do that. That's not what I'm asking.
So, but if we're going to talk about 80% of, I mean, I don't know any other way to do it, Amanda, other than, again, I think more conversation is important, but I'm not sure how you would measure that and ensure that you had 80%. If you meet CEP at 77 or whatever that number is, that threshold number, then you're technically not at 80% unless you know that 100%, which is what you're saying. You would have to go in individually, right?
Right. I'm saying, but if the local district got to the threshold at 77%, they're not 100%, right? Like if they hit the threshold by being 80%, then
Right.
saying I have to be 80% is not 80% of their 80%.
That's right.
Yeah, and I'm not asking for the statute to be changed. I actually think it's a really good one, and I think it sets our state apart from other state laws. And so I'm not asking for that to be changed. It's just a matter of what it looks like on the framework and how we monitor that within our schools.
Yeah, and I think that's what we were saying too. I think we're all saying the same thing. That a fair metric that we can use to ensure that you're meeting that 80% of whatever the district is in which you're located, but finding the way to do that is important. And I don't know that there's a way to reduce administrative burden on schools. I don't know that answer without getting actual numbers, from the school. So you could compare, you know what I mean? Because if you meet the threshold, I don't know.
And
Archie, you have a thought?
I was just saying that I think just OTS or either MDE, Department of Child and Nutrition, they have that information. I know they have the information because they gave us ours for all the school districts that qualify for CEP. And I think that's just it. Like, how is this information available? Where is it available? Or if not, then are we able to get it?
I even think just noting when we put 100% for a school district, put an asterisk there that says they qualify for CEP. The federal standard for CEP is X percent. Like, I think even just noting that is helpful in my opinion. Like, so then we know, like, we are holding them to a standard, to this particular standard. Like that would even feel better for me. Like that I can explain to somebody who's trying to hold me accountable, or like to a funder who's looking at my results. Like, for that, I can explain, like, yes, in our first year, we had not qualified for CEP. Year 2 and beyond, we're CEP. Like, it just looks, as I look at it, just looks funny to me to say, like, oh, the district is 100%. You couldn't get to the 80%. Well, okay, let's.
Yeah, because that's our report cards. We don't, because that's all we have, especially being K2.
Right, especially being K2. Then with COVID, then with, like, I'm not going to have, when I come to get renewed, I'm not going to have like years of accountability data. I have these framework reports. And I know every school has that, but they also have the accountability piece. And so, yeah, that's all.
Okay.
That's the why. Yeah, I got the why.
That's the why. That's why I'm stressing on it.
Yeah, can I ask a few questions right quick? And Deirdre and Dr. Lisa, I really appreciate you all sharing this. Deirdre, one thing that stood out for me that you mentioned that literally never crossed my mind was if the local school district was cited by the MDE as overinflating their SPED population. Like, that is wild for me to think about, because I'm held to 80% of their number. And, like, granted, 80% versus 100% gives some wiggle room there. But, like, for all intents and purposes, if they're overinflated to the point where, like, they're being cited by special education experts, like, for the state, they're saying you are putting too many students in special education, the only chance I have to get to either, I have to over qualify my own students to like reach 80%, or I have to miss out on the 80% standard. So that I think was really revealing, and your point about like, we need to look more into that is, I think, a great one, DRG. So thank you for sharing that. And like, as I kept thinking about it, just throughout the whole thing, like I kept thinking, like, any statute that you have, any contract, like any whatever, like they're all proxies to like, what is the spirit, or like, what is the heart of like what you're trying to do. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we are not being discriminatory. We are not intentionally keeping out students, because when charters were first being formed, there was the fear that we would take quote unquote the good kids, which I hate that connotation in that language, but like that was the perception, was that we would take the good kids and deprive everyone else and steal all the state money and do all of this stuff, which is obviously counter to anything that any charter in Mississippi is trying to do. And so I think like we've gotten in this like really fascinating debate about like what's the best proxy to calculate that. But like, you know, I don't think we should lose track of the site that like, I don't think there's any question that any school in this state is trying to get away from any of those things. And so it's like, how do we navigate that? The other thing that I thought about is, you know, when there was the proposal about changing the statute to by grade in order to do that apples to apples comparison, I'm of mixed mind of that. I think the advantage of doing that is it feels obviously so much more equitable, particularly to lower grades, because like a district like JPS, for instance, the vast majority of their SPED population is beyond grade 2. And so it appears as though 11% or whatever of JPS is SPED, but 11% of their kindergartners are not SPED, you know, partly because they don't have time to go through the testing process. You know, they just started the journey. And so I feel like, you know, splitting it up in that way does make a lot of sense for that purpose. But I'm also wondering if that adds a level of complexity, because like, what's going to happen if like our school, for instance, is in compliance with grades 5, 6, and 8, but like not grade 7. And then next year, when like those grades shift and like those 7th graders become 8th graders, like what's going to happen? And so I almost wonder, is there a way to do like by grade band? So like, what's the like
Yes, I think that's exactly, Kevin, and I appreciate that comment too. I think you're exactly right, and I think that's what we're saying too. In the framework is where we flesh all that out. And we say, okay, in an early grade, you know, K1, K2 situation, we look at it this way. In a 3 through 6th grade, or think about LaFleur, they're 6th grade only this year. So think about them trying to meet standards of 80% here or 80% there. That'll be challenging. So really working the detail out in the framework itself and in the guidance, so you have a clear metric and you have a fair way to look at schools. I think that's the way to do it. I may be wrong, but I think
yeah, because anytime you're doing you're creating a performance framework, like, is there a way to have both an equitable system that's not complex? Like, is the quest for equity, like, does it have to necessitate like just making things super, super complicated? Right. I don't know. But that I think is
my answer to that is I don't think so. I think you can make it a lot more simple, and I don't think it has to be complicated. I think that's one of the challenges that we've had with the annual framework reports, is that the guidance itself that we have right now is incredibly complex. And in a lot of places, there is no way to define what the outcomes really need to be, or what they should be, or how we're going to measure them. And it's kind of nebulous. And I'll give you an example. So, for example, the School Meets Open Meetings Act. Well, if we don't have any evidence of that somebody's made a formal complaint or anything, then how do we measure that? You know, or school has timely reporting. Well, that's not defined anywhere necessarily. So how do you measure that?
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I think a simple, fair way to do this has got to be our goal.
Well, I share that spirit entirely. So thank you. Because the other question, I'm glad you brought up complaints too, is what would happen, Dr. Lisa, if 10 parents from Midtown came to you and said, my student has special needs and Kevin Parkinson told me they cannot come to Midtown because they do not serve SPED at Midtown. And you did an investigation and all 10 of those parents are very credible. You would shut us down. I mean, you would, yeah, I mean, there would be some things to happen. And so to me, it's like, I don't, and again, I don't want my words to come across as like, I don't want accountability, because that's not what I'm saying. But it's like, is that statute even necessary when there's already a process in place that says, if we think that you're being discriminatory, we're going to take action. Like you wouldn't wait until the next review cycle came up. Like you wouldn't wait until we were up a review and then say, well, this one point on the performance framework is an issue. Like you would take action against the school immediately, as you should. And so I just, again, I'm wondering, like, what's the spirit of the law, and then what is the best way to measure for that? So yeah, I just thought about that. And then the other thing I'll say is, it seemed like when we were talking in previous meetings, some of the biggest concerns that were brought up were the apples to apples grade level comparison, which I think has been sufficiently addressed, and y'all did a great job of that. The other one that I felt like was brought up was the, and this is something that I feel personally, so I'll name it for myself, is the size of the school. Being a small school just shifts our numbers drastically. So last year we fell below where we needed to be, and we received a nice letter from you all indicating such. This year we're way above. And honestly, I'm not sitting here bragging that we're way above, because it's just the way that the numbers flow. Like we just got a few new families, you know, and they brought our numbers up quite significantly. But when you're a small school and you have just a few, it works again in our favor or against our favor. Like just, that's the nature of the law of large numbers, is that your numbers shift drastically. And I don't see anything in what y'all are presenting here that addresses that point in particular. Is like, what do we do when like the school's not being discriminatory, the school is not keeping kids out, they are actively buying ads, trying to recruit specifically SPED students, like they're doing all of these things, and yet a few families move away and it's good. And again, I say that as someone who right now, I'm sitting high, like I'm still like, this is no problem, we're good, like don't worry about it. But I know very well, if like 2 of my families choose to leave, then I'm back into a place where like there could be some problems. And that's just the nature of like the district I'm working with is 25,000 students, and I'm 250 students. And so it's just, you know, how does that process work?
Yeah. I made a note, Kevin, to include that there, because DRC and I did talk about that.
And I think it was kind of as well, I don't think on the PowerPoint, it didn't explain it thoroughly, but we did talk about it. And I think that's when it goes to one, showing documentation of effort for recruitment. How do we know? So looking at the framework, it's 3 points, right? How do we know we're working towards those 3 points? It's just the clarity around that and being clear so that you actually know, Kevin, one, looking at a certain point in time, I can prove that we did this. I can prove that we notify families that we do accept special education students. If I've done all of this, then this is 3 points. So it doesn't really affect us there. So that's what, just to explain it a little bit further than what was on the PowerPoint, that's what I meant in that section there. And I think, Lisa, you actually brought this up. How do we know we're working towards these 3 points? Because that's what it was. It says documentation of effort, but what is that going to do? We don't know. And I think that's in the framework guidance. And then also looking at numbers, if possible, looking at numbers more than once a year, if you can average them for, especially schools like you and I we started with 130 something students last year. So losing 2 brought us under, and it was a family. So really losing one family brought us under.
I think looking at those numbers over time, and maybe there's a way to address that, you know, like when you do your site selected indicators, or your, you know, quarterly, or whatever you turn in when you turn in your benchmark data. maybe you turn in enrollment, and maybe you turn in all that information at the same time. And then at the end of the year, we look at that data as opposed to the data we collect when we're in it, because every school doesn't get a site visit every year.
Mhm.
So right now, according to the framework, that's the way the framework is written. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity for improving the framework and the guidance without having to dig into the statute too much, that could cause unintended consequences.
And that was my last question, Dr. Lisa, because I appreciated you bringing that to our attention in terms of, when you open up statute, the risks that are involved there. And so I guess my question is, as a charter community, who is spearheading the legislative affairs or kind of those kind of efforts? Like, do you prefer us to marshal that through you? Is Grant, I know with Empower Mississippi, is he the one taking the charge there? Or who is the one that is ensuring that if we do open up statute, because I hear the fear, but also there will be things that need to be changed. And so should we be coordinating those individually? Is there a central effort? Do you see that as your role, as others?
I see it as both, Kevin. I really, to be honest with you, I think it has to be, that's why we're putting together a task force, because I do think it has to be a collective effort. Since we're at a disadvantage, we don't have a charter association in the state. There was an effort a long time ago to put one together, but I don't know what happened with it, to be honest with you, because I wasn't in this work at that time, so I don't know what happened. But Alabama has one, and Louisiana has one, and Tennessee has one, and Arkansas has one, and we don't have that advantage that we've got a group, putting together professional learning opportunities for y'all and doing all of that outside work, outside of the agency work, and then paying a lobbyist to lobby on our behalf as well. So we don't have that. We do have Mississippi First, and we do have Empower, both who support our work 100% and will, I think, work with us anytime we need their support. But I think it's going to be communicating to them because we got to be on the same page. Empower can't go out and lobby on our behalf or on the behalf of the charter community and it be something that the agency opposes. I think we need to present a united front, and the legislature would appreciate a united front as opposed to independent people going out and lobbying this issue or that issue to the legislature. That's a kind of a gut feeling on that. But I have been over there. Well, I did that presentation last year, and I talked to, I was at an event early on, which just had legislators and the governor and some other folks attended that. And I was able to really share some of the good things that were going on. I have meetings set up right now. Well, not final dates set up, but with the lieutenant governor's office, with the governor's office, with the speaker's office. I've reached out and connected with them because we have our annual report ready to share. So, and it's got great information in it. So we'll continue to lobby and share the good news. And then as a result of the legislative task force, I think we'll be able to make some efforts if we need to. You know what I mean? Does that help answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Amanda's asking about the annual report. You do not have a copy of that yet. And the reason, Jordan, you can speak to this, but she has them ready. We're waiting on, ready to go in the mail, right?
Yes, the hard copy is ready to go in the mail as soon as we receive the finished completed work from Mississippi First with their survey results. But that annual report is available on the website if you want to take a look at it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we have it ready. We want to put a letter in there. We want to put the annual survey results in there. For the parent survey results, the indications are that it was really good again. So that's great to know. We'll have a report from Mississippi First on the 12th when we meet in October for the board meeting. And they'll do their report. Their contract ends on the 30th. So they're wrapping up the details on that right now. And then we'll have the annual report. We'll have that. We have one other thing that we were going to put in there. The letter, I guess. That was it.
Where's the annual report? Is it just called annual report?
It's on the resources page, and it's 2019 annual report. I'm gonna pull
Got
it
it.
up to make sure.
I was looking under recent news. That's fine.
The front of it looks like this, y'all. Can you see it? It's pretty adorable. Isn't that so cute?
Yeah.
Cute, cute, cute. There's a picture of Amanda in here. Look. There's one of D'Archie's babies.
Yeah, I seen that when y'all scroll through.
And then there's a picture of Amanda's school on the back. There's some great pictures in here and great data, y'all. Some really nice things to be able to celebrate. So it's exciting to see the growth, and the growth not only in our numbers, but also the growth in just the community itself. So it's exciting to see that. Okay, other questions? I know Christy had some questions we were going to circle back to.
Chrissy, just for clarity, I was talking about MAEP overall, nothing to do with SPED. So just MAEP dollars.
That's what I was talking about too. So was MAEP.
But you have two different perspectives. I mean, you're D'Archie, did I understand y'all? Christy, you had one perspective that it came only from that first month 1, and D'Archie had a different perspective on MAEP. Did I understand that right?
That
That's
local
right. That's right.
The local comes from month 1 always. So what we have by October 1, and then they can use, well, I'm gonna count September as month 1, September, October, or November, or even possibly December data, but they usually won't because that's too quick of a turnaround for them to get the projections to the legislator for funding when MDE takes it based off of what they need.
Okay, I'm going to look into that and see so we can get clarity around it. But I always understood, Christy, what you understood.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. I think just, for everyone to know, and it's not like, it's not like if it's month 1 after that, you don't care about attendance, but
Yeah,
I think just so everyone knows, what to expect.
Yeah.
And you can really see based off of what they gave, and I think y'all actually received money, but I know we lost money because of the ADA factor into it, but you can actually look at, maybe able to tell your ADA from that month and see if it aligns with month 1 of what you had last year. But ours aligned with November.
So the money that you lost, you're saying that your ADA was from that month?
Yes.
From November?
Yep.
I'm making a note to look at that detail a little bit more. Okay. All right. Other questions, y'all? I know we got off task a little bit, but
It was great discussion. No other questions? Okay, well, thanks, Dr. K and D'Archie. We had great discussion after that. So with our next steps, if you two would be so kind to upload your presentation into the Google folder. For our next meeting in October, I am going to go ahead and collapse all the recommendations that we have gathered throughout our task force meetings. And during our next meeting, we will together be able to go through to decide which recommendations we would like to proceed on with to send to the Performance and Accountability Committee. So we can all talk through those. I'll put them all together so that we don't have to, flip back and forth and so forth. And I'll go ahead and put those together. And then that way we as a task force can have an open discussion, do a vote if we need to on these recommendations in order to move them to the Performance and Accountability Committee. So if you guys have any questions about that, definitely let me know. So I'll go back into that folder with all the presentations there and go ahead and collapse that information for our next meeting. So it should be exciting to talk through and discuss how we want to proceed. And if we have any recommendations, and we may not after discussion, but either way, we'll work through that together at our next meeting. And that meeting should take place on October the 13th. Hopefully, we will not have to change that one. But if we do, we'll definitely let you all know. But October the 13th at 2 o'clock will be our next meeting. So I'm looking forward to it. Do not forget to go into the sign in the Google and student enrollment task force folder. Be sure to initial check off and so forth. And if you have any questions or comments or anything, meanwhile, definitely feel free to reach out to us to let us know. Alrighty, you guys have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining. I'll see you all later.
Thanks for your help. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Y'all have a good afternoon.
Thanks.
Bye.